7 hidden habits the Bible calls sin. You might be doing them daily. There are moments when the room is quiet, but your mind isn't. You replay what you said earlier. That sharp reply, that small lie, that hidden thought no one else heard. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, just another normal day, just another reaction. But later, something feels off. You try to ignore it. You scroll, you distract yourself, you move on. But deep down, there's a weight you can't explain. Not heavy enough to stop your life, just heavy enough to slowly drain your peace. I've had days where everything looked fine on the outside, but inside I knew something wasn't right. The truth is, most of the habits that distance us from God don't look dramatic. They don't feel like rebellion. They feel ordinary, привычно, almost invisible. And that's exactly why they're dangerous. Because when something becomes normal, we stop questioning it. The Bible doesn't just speak about sin as something loud and obvious. It speaks to the quiet patterns of the heart, the things we repeat daily without even noticing. The attitudes we carry, the words we release too quickly, the thoughts we entertain when no one is watching. As James 1:14-15 says, "But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death." It doesn't start big. It starts small. A habit, a reaction, a choice we repeat. And if we're not careful, what feels harmless today can quietly shape who we become tomorrow. Number 1. Speaking carelessly without guarding your words. It usually happens fast. A sentence slips out before you think. A joke that cuts a little deeper than you intended. A complaint spoken out of frustration. In the moment it feels harmless, even justified. After all, everyone talks like that, right? But the Bible treats our words very differently. It doesn't see them as small. It sees them as powerful. What we say reveals what's inside us, even when we try to hide it. Jesus made this clear in Matthew 12:36-37. "I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." Every careless word, not just the cruel ones, not just the obvious ones, the careless ones. That's uncomfortable because it means the quick reactions, the sarcastic remarks, the little exaggerations we barely notice, they matter. They're not just sounds, they shape relationships. They either bring life or quietly wound others. And sometimes, the damage isn't even visible right away. A harsh tone can linger in someone's heart long after the conversation ends. A careless sentence can echo in someone's mind for days. Words don't disappear, they plant something. James goes even further in James 3:5. "So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire." A small fire. That's what careless speech is. It doesn't look dangerous at first, until it spreads. The truth is, guarding your words isn't about being perfect. It's about being aware, pausing, letting God shape your response before it leaves your mouth. Because once it's spoken, you can't take it back. And if something as small as words can carry that much weight, then what about the things we carry in our hearts? Like anger we refuse to release. Number 2, holding on to anger and refusing to forgive. It starts quietly. Someone hurts you. Maybe they didn't even realize it. Maybe they did. And at first you try to move on. You tell yourself it's fine. You push it down. But it doesn't go away. It shows up in your thoughts, in the way you replay the situation, in the way your tone changes when you mention their name. You don't explode, you just hold it. And over time, that quiet anger becomes part of you. The Bible doesn't ignore this kind of anger. It speaks directly to it. Not because anger itself never happens, but because holding on to it changes your heart. Ephesians 4:26-27 says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity to the devil." There's a difference between feeling anger and feeding it. When we hold on to anger, we give it space to grow. It begins to shape how we see people. It hardens us. It builds walls we didn't even intend to create. And slowly, forgiveness starts to feel impossible. But Jesus raised the standard even higher in Matthew 6:14-15. "For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." That's not easy to hear. Because forgiveness doesn't mean the pain wasn't real. It doesn't mean what happened was okay. It means choosing not to carry the weight any longer. And that's where many people struggle. Not because they don't know they should forgive, but because they don't know how to let go. Holding on to anger feels like control, like protection. But in reality, it keeps you tied to the very thing that hurt you. Forgiveness, on the other hand, feels like loss at first, but it's actually release. And once you begin to see how something hidden inside your heart can quietly shape your life, it becomes clear that the next habit is even more subtle and even more dangerous. Number 3, living in pride instead of humility before God. It doesn't always look like arrogance. Most of the time, pride is much quieter than that. It shows up in the way you rely only on yourself, the way you resist correction, the way you feel just a little above others, even if you never say it out loud. You don't need to boast to struggle with pride. Sometimes it's hidden behind independence, behind "I can handle this," behind the refusal to admit weakness. But the Bible speaks clearly about how God sees pride, not as strength, but as a barrier. As Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." That fall doesn't always happen in a dramatic way. Sometimes it's slow, subtle. You drift further from God without realizing it, because pride convinces you that you're already where you need to be. And that's the danger. Pride closes your ears. It makes it hard to listen, hard to grow, hard to receive anything from God, because deep down, you don't feel like you need Him as much. James 4:6 says, "God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble." Think about that for a moment. God opposes the proud, not ignores, opposes. Humility, on the other hand, isn't about thinking less of yourself. It's about seeing yourself truthfully before God, knowing your need, being willing to say, "I don't have this figured out." Because the moment you stop depending on God, you start depending on yourself. And that's where pride quietly takes root. It's subtle. It feels normal, but it shifts your heart away from surrender. And once your heart begins to rely more on itself than on God, it becomes easier to fall into another habit that feels almost unavoidable in daily life: constant worry. Number 4, worrying constantly instead of trusting God. It can feel impossible not to worry. Bills, health, family, the future, it all piles up. Your mind keeps running, trying to solve things you can't control. You tell yourself you're just being responsible, just thinking ahead. But deep down, it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like pressure. Worry drains you. It steals your rest. And yet, it feels so normal that you don't question it anymore. But the Bible doesn't treat constant worry as something harmless. It gently but clearly points to something deeper, a struggle to trust. Jesus said in Matthew 6:25, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on." He wasn't ignoring real problems. He was pointing to something greater than them. Worry says, "I have to carry this." Faith says God is already holding it. Philippians 4:6-7 makes this even clearer. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Peace doesn't come from having control. It comes from surrendering it. But that's where the struggle is. Letting go feels risky. Trusting God feels uncertain when you can't see the outcome, so you keep worrying, thinking it somehow helps. In reality, it just keeps your heart restless. Worry slowly pulls your focus away from God's presence and places it on your problems. And when that happens long enough, your perspective begins to shift, not just about your situation, but about other people too. And that's where another habit quietly begins to grow. The habit of judging others while ignoring what's happening inside your own heart. Number 5, judging others while ignoring your own heart. It can feel almost automatic. You notice something in someone else, their attitude, their choices, the way they speak, and before you realize it, you've already formed a judgment. Not out loud, not always, but inside. You compare, you measure, you conclude, and somehow, in that quiet moment, you feel just a little more right, a little more secure. But Jesus spoke directly into this habit, not to shame us, but to wake us up. Because the real danger isn't seeing what's wrong in others, it's being blind to what's happening inside us. As Matthew 7:3-5 says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is the log in your own eye?" It's a strong image, a speck, and a log. Jesus isn't saying we should ignore sin or truth. He's pointing to something deeper, the posture of our heart. When we focus more on others' flaws than our own, we stop growing. We become critical instead of compassionate, distant instead of understanding. And the truth is, judging others often comes from a place we don't want to face. It can come from insecurity, from comparison, from trying to feel better about ourselves without actually changing. But the Bible calls us to something different. Not perfection, but humility. Not silence, but self-awareness. Because when you begin to look honestly at your own heart, something shifts. You become slower to judge, quicker to extend grace, more aware of how much you need it yourself. And once that awareness begins, it naturally leads to a deeper question, not just how you see others, but what you truly love most in your life. Number 6, loving the world more than loving God. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one day and decide to love the world more than God. It happens slowly, through small shifts in attention, in desire, in priority. You start chasing things that feel good, success, approval, comfort. You give more time to what satisfies you in the moment, and less time to what feeds your soul. And before you realize it, your heart begins to attach itself to things that were never meant to hold it. The Bible speaks very clearly about this tension. As 1 John 2:15-16 says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life, is not from the Father, but is from the world." This isn't about rejecting life or the people around you. It's about what takes first place in your heart. Because whatever you love most shapes you. When the world becomes your focus, your identity starts to depend on things that don't last. Your peace rises and falls with circumstances. Your worth becomes tied to what you achieve or what others think of you. But none of that can truly satisfy. Not deeply, not permanently. God isn't trying to take joy away from you. He's trying to protect your heart from being anchored to things that will eventually let you down. And that's where the shift becomes serious. Because when your love begins to drift, your obedience often follows. You start ignoring the quiet voice that once guided you. And that leads directly into the final habit, one that many people don't even realize they've fallen into. Number 7. Ignoring God's voice through disobedience. It's rarely loud. Most of the time, it's just a quiet nudge. A conviction you feel but don't act on. A direction you sense but choose to delay. You know what's right. You feel it clearly for a moment, but then you hesitate. You tell yourself, "Not now," or "It's not that serious." And slowly, that sensitivity begins to fade. The more you ignore it, the quieter it becomes. The Bible describes this pattern with surprising clarity, not as a sudden rejection of God, but as a gradual hardening of the heart. As James 4:17 says, "So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin." That's what makes this habit so dangerous. It's not just about doing wrong, it's about not doing what you already know is right. Over time, disobedience doesn't just affect your actions, it affects your awareness. What once felt clear becomes unclear. What once bothered your conscience no longer does. And that distance doesn't happen because God moved away. It happens because we stopped responding. But here's the truth that still remains. God continues to speak, not always in dramatic ways, but consistently, patiently, through His Word, through conviction, through quiet moments of clarity. The question is not whether God is speaking. The question is whether we are still listening. Because once we begin to ignore His voice, we slowly lose the very guidance we were meant to live by. And when you step back and see all of these habits together, the words, the anger, the pride, the worry, the judgment, the misplaced love, the quiet disobedience, you begin to understand something deeper about the condition of the heart and the invitation God is still extending. Conclusion: a gentle call to return before it hardens your heart. None of these habits usually feel extreme. That's what makes them so easy to live with and so dangerous to ignore. They settle into daily life, shaping thoughts, words, and decisions little by little, until distance from God no longer feels obvious. But the truth is, the moment you become aware of them is not a moment of condemnation. It's a moment of invitation. God does not reveal these things to push you away. He reveals them to draw you back, because no matter how long a habit has been part of your life, your heart is not beyond change. It is not too late to soften what has become hardened, to release what you've been holding, to realign what has slowly drifted. Return doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with honesty, a quiet turning, a willingness to say, "God, I see it now." And that's where everything starts to change.